Afternoon, guys. Wanted to take a moment to just kind of address our area coaches and athletes with the news coming down this week with the new guidelines and cancellations by the state for fall sport. It's been an emotional, a wild week as I think about our area coaches and athletes that we're preparing for the fall seasons, right? I think it's important to realize and understand that feeling that we're having is a feeling of grief. We're mourning the loss of the idea of what the season could have been. We're mourning the loss for our seniors of the idea of what your senior season was to look like. And we have to process those feelings because they're real and they're justified, those feelings of mourning and grief. And we have to work through those stages. But as we work through those, there's a few things that we want to do as we come out on the other side, and some things to help focus our mind as we work through these stages of grief and mourning. And that first one is to work through this together, right? You're not isolated, right? We're going through this as a community. We're going through this as athletes and coaches. We aren't alone. And sometimes it's easier to draw back and isolate, but unlike an injury, unlike something I went through where I broke my ankle and had to spend all my time away in the doctors and in the training facility, away from my teammates and coaches, and sport being taken away there. We aren't isolated. We can gather and talk and communicate with our teammates and our coaches about the emotions that we're experiencing at the loss of this season. Secondly, looking from a biblical basis, Jesus' first two disciples that he called were fishermen, and I don't think that was on accident. Fishermen at the time spent a lot of their time preparing their nets to be able to go out and catch fish, and as they pull the fish in, their nets would wear and break, and they would have to go back and prepare and sew them and patch them up again so that they could go out to do their job. What a great opportunity we have is we've hit the pause button for sports for a season to prepare our nets, to prepare our hearts and our minds and in our practices to be able to get the most out of our athletes, for athletes to get the most out of yourself, to get the most out of your training, to prepare your hearts to be the best that you can be with the gifts, skills, talents, and abilities that God's blessed you with on the court, the field, the mat, whatever it may be. And then lastly, staying connected with one another, finding ways to build relationships within the team, coaches finding ways to build relationships with one another, to understand the impact that you guys get to have each and every day that you're with these athletes, whether if it be through virtual call or in person. As we're working through this process and understanding and coming to grips with what's happened, I want to leave you guys with this. Sports is what you do, athletes. It's not who you are. Sports is something that you do. Sports is an avenue of play. It's something that we love and something that we cherish, but it's ultimately not what defines you as a person. Coaches, sport is not what defines you as a man or woman. Sport is a tool in which you use to impact these young men and women that you get to coach each day. So let's not forsake and feel like we don't get to still have that impact. You can still have that lasting impact that you're called to have on these young men and women, raising up and encouraging and building the next generation of leaders. While sport was your tool, it is not what you did, is not who you are. So understand where your identity lies and the importance that sport had, but sport is a tool so that you guys could have lasting impact on these young people's lives. And we thank you for that, and I'm praying for each one of you as we process this and go through this. I want to leave you guys with this verse from 1 Timothy 4:8. For physical training is of some value, but godliness has training for this life and the next. For physical training, the practices, the fundamentals, all that stuff is great, but it's been taken away. Godliness has value for this life and the next. Not just the spiritual side of it, but to take this time to prepare our hearts and our minds to be the best that we can be. To understand that we don't cling to the hope of sport and the temporary pleasure of this earth, but that we rest and we have peace in the fact that we hope in the everlasting life that we have in Jesus Christ, who died on the cross for each one of our sins. So I'm praying for each one of you as you go through this mourning process and work through this. I pray that this season is a time where relationships just blossom and grow. I pray that you experience joy and peace and wisdom in this season as you find new and unique ways to connect with athletes. Athletes, as you find new and unique ways to connect with one another in your team. So praying for each one of you. I hope you guys have a great weekend. If you ever need anything, feel free to reach out to us. Find someone close to you as well, a mentor, a teammate, a fellow coach, someone that you can process these emotions with. You guys don't have to do this alone. We're in this together, and my prayer is that sports returns sooner rather than later. Love you guys. Have a great weekend.